Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Innovate Queensland Grid webinar, Ignite Ideas Fund Round 4. My name is Alexandra Connors from the Impact Innovation Group, and we deliver the Innovate Queensland program, which supports the Queensland Government's Advanced Queensland initiative. Today as our presenters, we have Brian Ruddle, Managing Director of Impact Innovation Group, and Paul Russell, Executive Director of Innovation Programs and Engagement from the Department of Innovation, Tourism Industry Development and the Commonwealth Games. Together they'll discuss what's new this round, the need to know eligibility and assessment criteria, and commonly overlooked FAQs. Brian will then also offer tips for preparing a strong application and ideas for sourcing and accessing useful information. Just while we are waiting for the other people to connect into the webinar, I'll go through some of the tools we'll be using for those people that haven't used the system before. So your screen should look a little like this, a slide in the center and a control panel or dashboard on the right. This control panel will collapse automatically when you're not using it, so to keep it open, just click the View menu up the top and uncheck Auto Hide Control Panel. During the webinar, we might ask you a question so we better understand your experience with the topic. We'll ask you to raise your hand, and to do that, just click on the little hand icon. To then lower your hand, click on the same icon again. So I might just do a test quickly if everyone that can hear me clearly, if you don't mind clicking on the hand icon. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Right. There's also an opportunity for you to ask questions. However, for the webinar to flow smoothly and that we stick to the time allocated, we'd prefer to answer the questions at the end, but you can send us your questions at any time when they occur to you. You can also use this function to let us know if you're having any problems with the broadcast. We also have some handouts for you, which you can access and download by clicking on this section here. They will not be available to download after the completion of the webinar, so I'll remind you again at the end of the presentation. Now, in a moment, I'm going to hand the screen over to Brian and Paul. Brian has been both a pitcher and a panelist for innovation funding. He has helped several startup companies raise between $450,000 and $2 million in seed rounds and negotiated many license agreements with Australian and international companies to help startups and SMEs get new products and services ready for the market. He has also participated on numerous assessment panels, helping government and private investors evaluate which proposals are likely to deliver the best outcomes for the funds available, commercially, economically, and socially. Paul comes from a small family business background in regional Queensland. He has a strong affinity for small businesses and a very grounded approach. In September 2016, Paul moved into the Innovation Division with responsibility for delivery of a range of startup and business-facing grants, programs and projects, of which include the Precinct, Advancing Regional Innovation Program, the Ignite Ideas Commercialisation Support Fund, Hot Desk Startup Landing Program, the Industry Accelerators Fund, and the Knowledge Transfer Partnerships Graduate Placement Program. Okay, so I'll just hand the screen over to our presenters. Over to you, Brian and Paul.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ali. We're just getting the screen up there, and there we are. Welcome, everyone. Ali's done a great job introducing both Paul and myself. In terms of today's webinar, what we're going to do is to sort of step through some of the success stories and overview of the Round 4 Ignite Ideas program, and then step into the assessment criteria, looking at what assessors do, red flags and things like that, some of the match funding requirements going forward and some key messages. As Ali said, look, please send through questions as we go through this presentation, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to I suppose, let you know, I suppose, some of the changes with this particular round as compared to previous round of the Ignite Ideas Fund. And it's also going to pick up on some of the things that we've been presenting in some of the masterclasses. And, you know, I know that a few of you have attended those masterclasses that we've been running over the last year and a half or so. So with that, I'll hand over to Paul just to give a bit of an overview of round 4, some of the changes and also some of the success stories.
Thanks very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone online. So we're into round 4 of Ignite Ideas. So the previous 3 rounds have committed just over $26 million to just over 200 startups and innovative small and medium businesses in Queensland. The good news is the government made a commitment at last year's election to put another $30 million into Ignite Ideas going forward. So the program has a runway into the future. And if you decide not to apply this round because you may not be ready, there will be opportunities in future rounds to access the program as well. So a very important consideration is that we are looking ideally for market ready or near to market ready innovative ideas and projects. Importantly, from a government point of view, we're looking for projects that have the capacity to scale up across Queensland, within Australia, and ideally internationally to grow global markets for Queensland. And most importantly, we are very focused on creating jobs now and creating jobs for the future. And so they're very important criteria, particularly when we look at, Brian will talk about the benefits accruing from your project to Queensland's economy later on. That's one of our 5 factors. Also associated with this year, a fundamental change in market ready test. We have introduced into the application form the concept of the technology readiness level, or TRL model as it's referred to. It's a concept that comes out of NASA in America, and it allows innovators to gauge where their project or technology or service is at on a 9-point scale. And we'll deal with that a little bit later on, and there's a lot of information to help you. Most importantly, the program is industry sector agnostic. It is technology agnostic. It is absolutely for small, medium and startup businesses up to 200 employees, looking for your project to scale, the degree to which your project can make a step change in an industry sector or multiple sectors, the evidence that you meet a genuine need, and letters of support come in very important here, and we'll deal with that, and clear evidence that you're market ready, that you're investable as far as a project is concerned. So we're open now, and we close exactly at 2 p.m. on Wednesday the 9th of May. We anticipate after that there'll be a 12-week process where we conduct independent external assessments. We then do some financial and other due diligence on a shortlisted applicants, and then we recommend a list of applicants to the Minister for funding. So that will take roughly about a 12-week period after the close on the 9th of May. What I just wanted to highlight is some examples of success stories to date from previous rounds. Now, this is just a very small sample of 8 out of 203. I just want to highlight the diversity of the projects and businesses. There are a whole range that I've left off this slide that are in regional Queensland, that are industries associated with tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, construction, professional services, mining, a whole range of industries. This is just a very, very succinct summary. So Go1 are a company from Springwood down in Logan who are traditionally involved in corporate training programs, and they have funding to deliver a mobile application for both Apple and Android applications online for corporate users, for multi-users. Blockgrain are using blockchain platform to open up the grain trading market, commodity market, to grain growers through to end producers of products such as cereal products, etc. Working Mouse is an innovative company out of St. Lucia that is developing code bots that will essentially automatically write 90% of computer or software programs for a whole range of applications. Site D is a relatively new startup business that is focused on working with telecommunications carriers and the owners of infrastructure such as telecommunications towers to allow them to have better visibility over the maintainability of their towers and the opening up common users of their towers. Immersive Robotics are doing very innovative VR headset technology that allows multiple people to have the same experience all at one time using wireless technology. Currently, wireless headsets are pretty much limited to individuals rather than multiple numbers of people. Airway Medical Innovations is developing a medical device which will improve the chances of survival for people who are suddenly struck down with breathing difficulties without having to rush off to hospital. Travel by Bit is a company which is using Bitcoin technology to open up the market for small and medium tourist operators across Queensland to international visitors to pay for their services using Bitcoin platforms. And a very unusual one is a company here in Brisbane that has developed world-class snow ski field management systems for all the major snow fields in North America out of Brisbane. So they have no customers in Australia. All their customers are in North America. There are a couple of others like Idsville Sandstone from central Queensland, a really small sandstone mining company that's using the very fines from the sawing of the sandstone that goes into construction projects to develop high-performing ingredients for world-famous Portland cement product globally. But it's a very small niche-built business in regional Queensland. And Brian and listeners, the point that I'm making is the program Ignite Ideas applies to multiple industries, multiple technologies. It's not exclusive to just the latest digital platforms, etc.
No, that's great, and thanks very much for that, Paul. And I think that's a really good point because there are a number in this example in this list here on the screen that are digital, but there's a whole range of companies that have received grant funding from previous rounds that are doing a lot of non-digital activities, which is fantastic. We'll go through and have a look at some of the assessment criteria now, but before we do, I just sort of thought it'd be useful to step through about, well, what do assessors do once you actually they receive your application? And the reason I thought I'd start here is because you need to actually take this into account when you're preparing your application. You need to be thinking about how the assessors operate and how they're going to be reviewing your document. Because while you know a lot about your business and about your technology or your product or service that you're bringing to market, the assessor doesn't. Essentially, all they're doing is reading what you provide them. And so you need to be writing your application to someone that doesn't know really anything about you. And so it's a little bit like a job application. So when, as an assessor, and there's a whole range of assessors for Ignite, they generally check their conflict of interest straight up to make sure that there's no conflict with them doing that assessment. They read the entire application. Often they'll undertake a little bit of desktop research. That really depends on how much they know about the subject area. They will do marking on a scoring sheet. And that's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, that this is, again, a bit like a job application. You're competing against others. The whole role of the assessor is essentially to give you a mark. give you a score. And we'll go into the number of assessors for each of the elements of Ignite Ideas, because often there's moderation meetings as well, where assessors come together and they compare their scores, just to try to make sure that there was full understanding about the application that you'll be submitting, as well as the opportunities there. Just covering off on a few red flags from an assessor's perspective. If you don't answer a question or you avoid a question, it's a really big issue. As an assessor, you are looking at putting a score down for a section. So if you don't answer it or you avoid answering the question fully, you won't score very well. If you say that there's actually no competition or there's no risks, that's a pretty major red flag, because the assessors are actually in this game. Most of them have had their own startups. They understand the industry and they understand that there is competition and risks everywhere. Having unrealistic market estimates is another red flag. Yes, you want to be optimistic, but you need to temper that with a degree of realism. If you have unsubstantiated claims, it's a bit of a red flag. You know, if you say that, you know, you're going to get 30% of the global market, for example, and from that application, you can't really see how you're going to do that, it comes across that the management team that's put this together is really clutching at straws, is really, you know, going out there and just plucking a number out of thin air. Doubtful letters of support. Now, letters of support are critical. Be very careful about the cookie cutter approach, where you actually write the letter of support and send it out to 2 or 3 people, and so they send the exact same letter back, because the assessors see that and they discount the value, if you like, or the validity of those letters of support. So go out, sure, help people to put those letters of support together, but just be careful about them all being the same.
Brian, can I just talk about how critical high quality letters of support are to the assessors? Obviously, the closer you can get to a letter of support from a paying customer or an organisation that is agreeing to go pilot as a pilot customer for your project or your technology, the better it is for you. But so customers or project collaborators in your supply chain are critical. Letters of support from major suppliers or specialist contractors that are going to work with you to deliver your project, and letters of support from funders, such as you may have a business angel, or you might have some private capital, or some more established lines of finance that's invested in your project today. Letters of support from those tangible sources are like gold in the minds of the assessors.
No, that's exactly right. And look, the last point might come across as a little bit pedantic, but when there's spelling mistakes, sentences that don't make sense, grammatical errors that are really, you know, it makes it difficult to read, it actually reflects really poorly on an application. Getting back to the earlier point that you're actually competing against others, when an assessor looks at something and there's spelling mistakes all the way through it, they're starting to question the ability of the group they're going to be providing the grant to do marketing documents, to do pitch decks to investors. And so it's really important that you get someone to do some proofreading of your application before it goes in, because, again, it's a bit of a beauty contest with this. You need to put your best foot forward, and a well-written document definitely helps you do that. So with round 4, with the assessment criteria, there's 2 tiers as per previous rounds. Tier 1 up to $100,000, and there's 7 eligibility criteria. Tier 2 is up to $250,000, and there's 7 plus another 2 eligibility criteria. All of that information can be found on the Advanced Queensland website. We mentioned the external assessors. So Tier 1 has 2 assessors and Tier 2 has 3 assessors. So with the assessment criteria, and we'll go through those in a moment, they're not equally weighted, but keep in mind that all are important. And that final point there is aiming for a high distinction mark. It is a case of doing that. In previous rounds, it's extremely competitive in terms of the number of applications that come in. And so you need to be putting together an application that's really going for gold, because if you don't, there's a fair chance that it won't get up.
So we have a panel of independent assessors. These people have various backgrounds, various professional, technical and industry backgrounds. Some have been executives in big companies. Some have run very successful privately held companies. Others have been commercialisation managers, venture capitalists, business angels, and subject matter experts in certain technologies. The assessors tell us what their preferences are, the sorts of applications that they prefer to read and assess, and the ones that they do not wish to assess because they don't have that background. And we then, the department, allocate the assessors the projects or the applications based on their personal preferences.
Yep.
Some assessors only prefer to do tier ones. Some assessors much prefer to deal with tier 2 type applications.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. And again, it reiterates what I was saying earlier on. Keep in mind who you're pitching this grant application to. You're pitching it to these assessors. You don't know who they are at the moment. We understand that's a difficult thing, but Paul just gave a really good feel for the types of people that you're pitching to. But keep in mind that they're reading your application for the first time. So it needs to be written in a way with enough detail to convince them that you're an investable entity. And I use the term investable entity because even though it's a grant, you need to approach this as you would for any other investment. So let's go through some of the criteria. And again, we won't labour the point with these. This information can be found up on the website. So the first one's around innovation market potential. It's worth 25%. So you need to be looking at how your idea, product, service, etc. is clearly innovative, unique, and new. Yeah, you need to look at the differentiation. Now, going back to my earlier point, it's not going and saying that there's nothing out there like it, because there will be something out there like it. You need to actually talk about and I suppose focus on that differentiation piece and look at that from the perspective of customers. Look at the value proposition, how what you're proposing really meets a market need. And that goes back to Paul's earlier point about those letters of support, because if you can get letters of support from your target market, it really helps to demonstrate that value proposition. And then that evidence of demand or support, from your customers, industry partners. So yeah, that's your letters of support there. The criteria too, now this is new. So this is around technology readiness levels that Paul mentioned earlier on. This is something that you have to assess yourself on. And again, there's more information in the application forms and up online. Just by way of quick background for those of you who haven't seen it before, as Paul said, NASA came up with this concept, and the reason they came up with it was so that they could get different groups that were working on technologies to have a common language in terms of how ready the technology is. So the whole thing with this is to aim as a minimum of a TRL 5, and it's probably a really useful initial screen for yourselves as to what your chances of success are. Because if you have a look at this and you're between a sort of a 0 and a 4, it's actually going to be extremely difficult for you to get up. So it's not a bad initial screening tool. Now, even though it says technology readiness, that term is used because of the way that NASA actually brought that together. But this tool is actually extremely useful for services, just ideas in general. It doesn't have to be a latest and greatest technology as such. What it is, though, it's a way for you to start having a look at where you are in that 9-point scale. And then on the second front, it's actually for the assessors to start having a look at it as well. So keep in mind not to be too bullish, if you like, in terms of your own rating of a TRL, because it's all about trying to get that alignment with, with the assessors. Because if you say that you're at a 9, but then the way the assessors are reading it, you're at a 5, it starts to create doubts in their mind. Okay, if you're out by 1 or so, that's not a problem. But you need to think about how you actually rank yourself there.
So, Brian, you make a very important point. So the assessors will be seeking the evidence behind why you've rated yourself a 6 through your answers to the questions and the other supporting documents that you've attached to that. So the point that I would make is if you're not quite ready this time around, if you are in the 4 or lower level, you're best to work on your idea in the months ahead and be in a much better position for next time we go to market with Ignite Ideas.
No, that's a really, really good point. Because look, putting these applications together takes a lot of time and effort. You want to make sure that you're going to give it the best shot you can. Criteria 3 is around your project planning, your feasibility, your budget, and your timeframes, and that's at 20% there. So you need a project plan with key milestones and timeframes and your budget, not just for what you're seeking, but what that actual project requires. You need the market and commercial potential, your competitor analysis, starting to look at your business and financial models and you're sort of explaining how the project's going to grow those revenues and increase sales, how the resourcing and how it's going to be funded. You do need those statements from your accountant and CFO, and then sort of really bringing up the project risks and mitigation strategies. And I'll cover off on the risk side in a moment. Just a pointer, and this is something that we advise our clients from an impact innovation perspective, is to actually start with your project plan. If you actually start mapping out what you're going to try to achieve in terms of the activities, the resources, the milestones, if you map that out first, it actually makes writing the rest of your application a lot easier, because then in terms of writing all the other sections, you're justifying your plan. So we see people try to do it the other way around, and the plan's a little bit of an afterthought with sort of, I'll call them sloppy milestones and things like that don't really hang together well from a project perspective. So it's just a hint to, if you do your project plan first and then you write the rest of it around it, these proposals tend to hang together a lot better.
So can I just reinforce also, we don't require a full business plan for an application, but we require a succinct summary of the project and how it relates to the business or the business model that you're conducting. With respect to funding, obviously Tier 1, where we can fund up to $100,000 for startups and micro businesses, it is always good to have some skin in the game. But we can fund 100% of a project up to $100,000 for those very small businesses. In some cases, it would be advisable to receive a letter from your external accountant that your business at a very early stage can carry that project through over 12 months. The other thing that Brian mentioned was milestones. So when you fill out your application, you elect to tell us what your key milestone dates will be over the life of your project. Normally for a Tier 1, that's 3 milestones, and normally for a Tier 2, that's quarterly milestones. And it's important that you really think carefully about your milestones, because you'll be held to account through the payments, the acquittal payments that we make to you, that you've actually achieved and hopefully done better than your milestones. And the point that I make is this. A number of our Ignite Ideas companies that have completed their Ignite Ideas projects have gone on now to win very substantial Commonwealth government funding. through their commercialisation program, and a good track record of achievement in the Ignite Ideas is very highly regarded by our colleagues in Oz Industry.
Yes, it's a really good point. So just a couple of tips and tricks as we talk about project plans. One is to actually understand the cost of adoption. Now, the reason I hit upon this one is when we were running the masterclasses on putting grants together and also for investment, this was one that a lot of people felt like they hadn't really spent a lot of time on, because there's this assumption that you build it, you put a prototype, and then it's going to be really easy to get a customer. But you need to understand that cost of customers actually adopting what you've built out. And there are things like the retooling costs or retraining staff or, changing their supply chains or warranty requirements or regulatory hurdles or maintenance. There's a whole range of things there. And on the left-hand side, with bigger purchases that you're wanting customers to make. So let's say what you're selling costs $100,000. It could actually affect their job in the way that your customer, the person you're selling to within, say, a corporate, within enterprise sales, it could affect their career. You need to take these things into account when you're actually starting to map out your project about what you're going to achieve and then how that's actually contributing to those sales that you're really pushing for, whether they're in Australia or overseas. The other part, and I mentioned about risk earlier on, all early stage companies or projects have assumptions, and those assumptions relate to risk. So the more assumptions you've got, the higher the risk. Now, there's nothing wrong with having risk. But the thing to do is to actually include your risk mitigation strategies in your proposal. So within the project plans, we suggest that you really think about what those risks are. So identify them, identify the likelihood that they're going to occur, the consequence if they occur, and how you're going to manage that risk. If you have a look online, there's a number of different tables or formats that you can use if you want to put them in that, or you just list them out. There's a template there. I applaud that. Yeah, that's great.
I think there's a template, a basic project plan template, and a basic risk analysis table template if you want to use ours, but you can use yours or adopt from the internet.
But the key thing is to be upfront about risks, and this is something that we've found a lot with putting grant applications together. It's like pitching to customers or pitching to investors. If you actually map out your risks, but then outline how you're going to manage it, it comes across a lot stronger than saying that there's no risk because, trust me, I'll do the right thing sort of thing, well, this will work. So you're better off it actually strengthens, if you like, your application.
So just another point on risk. I have the unpleasant duty of writing to all unsuccessful applicants in each round. And the most common reason why assessors score applications low is that the applicant hasn't addressed the risk element of delivering the project or hasn't made appropriate assumptions around the potential for slippage and what might occur if there's slippage.
Yep.
We can deal with slippage in milestone payments by people who are successful putting in a variation request. But the assessors are very much looking, as Brian said, what are the assumptions underpinning your project? What are the risk elements? And what are you attempting to do to mitigate those risks? You may not be able to eliminate those risks, but what are you trying to do to mitigate those risks?
Yeah. No, that's it. So just on criterion 4 about the technical and management capability, so that's at 15%. Include a simple and succinct business plan. Keep in mind with any attachments that you're putting there, so same with CVs, they need to be succinct, they need to be targeted. Putting in 50, 80 pages of documents, you're actually asking the assessor to probably spend another 3 hours or so trawling through all of that material to give you a score. Keep in mind that this is all about them providing you with the score. So the more succinct you are, in terms of delivering the information that helps them make a decision, the better. Get the CVs in there, identify the ability to secure critical external expertise if required, and I'll touch on that in a moment, and include any details of advisory boards.
Oh, yes, that's a really important point. If you are getting advice from outside the company, who are they, and do you have a board around that?
Yep. And so there's two elements that I'd suggest that you have a look at. One's around your governance considerations. So this is, who are your founders and directors? Do they have board experience in delivering their value to shareholders? Any qualifications that they might have? So, for example, the Australian Institute of Company Directors. But then it is around the key advisors and the advisory board. Now, if you're a sole director, that's not a problem at all from a grant application perspective, but it helps to strengthen that if you start talking about advisors that you have around you to help you overcome challenges and roadblocks and other things as you're actually going forward with the implementation of the project. So the governance considerations is one area. The second is your management team experience. So, have they managed similar sized businesses? Have they grown those businesses? Project management expertise, the technical, the marketing experience, and financial experience. If you've got gaps, though, in the team, again, it's not a big issue. It's more about, is as part of your project application, are you filling those gaps? And so if the story hangs together that you need certain other technical expertise and this is the way you're bringing it in as part of the project, that's fine. The story hangs together. But if you don't have technical expertise, and as I said, you're a founder, sole director, and you're saying, again, trust me, I can run this project by myself, and it's very obvious that by bringing in other technical expertise, it would de-risk the project in a lot more, in a better way, you're not going to get the scoring around that whole management criteria. So criteria 5, and again, this is an extremely beneficial. This is an extremely important one. So it's benefits to Queensland and regional impact. You'll notice that this is 25%. That is a huge amount. Don't leave it to the last. So we often see with people writing grants, this is the last section normally in the application. It's the last thing to get written, but just keep in the back of your mind that this is worth 25%. So the big thing is to start looking at how your project is going to benefit Queensland. And be realistic about it. It's about increasing sales projections, export market potential, supply chain growth, benefits to regional Queensland and job creation projects. And I'll hand over to Paul because, I think the supply chain one in particular, there's some interesting things that you can think about there. So
thanks, Brian. Yes, I can't overemphasise how important this criteria is to the government. So even firms in Brisbane and Southeast Queensland need to think about what are the benefits to the broader Queensland economy, and particularly if there are any related business opportunities, supplier opportunities within the regions of Queensland. So I'd like to use a little bit of a case study here. Is that one of the companies that received Ignite Ideas in round 3 was a company from Yatala called SafeCam Technologies. So for any of you who drive along the M1 motorway right now between Brisbane and Commonwealth Games venues, you will pass a series of trailer-mounted speed cameras, detection cameras on the motorway. And in regional Queensland, you'll start to see these crop up on road building projects to keep road workers safe and manage lower speed limits. So this company received funding, but as a result of their funding, they have done business with 5 other small companies in Southeast Queensland. One trailer manufacturing company, a couple of companies in the electronics business, one in sensor technologies. And all of those companies have employed extra people, as has SafeCam Technologies. SafeCam Technologies have put on a university graduate from one of the universities, the graduate in information technology. This is the sort of story that you need to think about behind your project. in terms of the benefits to Queensland, not only directly to your business, but to other businesses in Queensland, particularly in regional Queensland, the jobs that you might create during the life of your project and beyond. An estimate in 3 years' time, we require you to provide an estimate. And are there opportunities to employ, you know, people in the regions or people graduating from universities in Queensland? That is what Advanced Queensland is about in a nutshell.
Yeah. So just a final point on this particular criterion, because I hear a lot of people complain about this, whether it's benefits to Queensland for Queensland funds or benefits to Australia for federal funding. The analogy I put back to people is, if you were pitching to an investor for 100,000 or 250,000, and you had to demonstrate the benefit to them, whether it was return on investment or whatever the benefit was to that investor, you would do it happily. This is the exact same thing. The government's not asking for a return on investment from a dollar perspective. It's a return on investment from a benefits to Queensland perspective. So it's just as important as a normal investor in terms of the benefits that they would be expecting.
So in terms of jobs, we talk about jobs supported. So they don't have to be all full-time jobs. They can be part-time jobs.
Yep.
They can commence as a casual job on your project, turning into a part-time job, eventually turning into full-time jobs in a year or two's time. That's all legitimate argument to support your application.
Yep. So I'll leave that one there, but just keep in back of your mind it's worth 25%. And going back to my earlier point, this is all a scoring game. This is about maximising your score. So there's one change with this round, and that comes back down to contributions. In previous rounds, there wasn't a request for contributions for the 100,000, but you'll see in this table here that if you're a small business with 5 to 19 FTEs, you're looking at 20% contribution, and then for medium or enterprises, it's 40%, and then for tier 2, of course, it's 50-50, 1-to-1 matching, 50%. So again, something just to keep in mind. So let's look at some key messages. So having a good idea, of course, is only the first step. We've talked about letters of support being really critical, and the impacts need to be bigger than just your commercial success. So this comes back to the value to Queensland. Your idea needs to be sufficiently developed. So if you, again, go back to the technology readiness levels, go back to what does this project actually look like, and make sure that you comply. And as Paul suggested, if it's not this round, maybe hold tight and get your information together to go for the next one. Put the time into the application. Like, this is highly competitive. It's really, really important that you take that on board. If you don't get up, don't be discouraged, because in all of the previous rounds, there's actually been some really good ideas that haven't got funding. Just sort of putting it out there. Look, while everyone wants to get funded with these things, the thing to keep in the back of your mind is even putting the application together around this project is going to help. And this is something that we've found not only with Queensland Government programs, but federal government programs as well, that you're putting this information together just helps to clarify what you're trying to achieve.
So Brian, just on round 3, of the 85 projects that were successfully funded, just on about a third of them were unsuccessful in the previous round.
Yeah.
So they learned and they improved and they strengthened their application.
Yep.
And the project probably changed in terms of it probably moved on and got more sophisticated, and they were successful the second time around.
Yeah, no, that's a really good message. And just while I think of it as well, if you have a look at the, I think it's on the Innovate Queensland YouTube channel. I think they actually might still be on the Advanced Queensland website as well. There were some webinars that we put together, which were webinars using the Grant Masterclass material. Highly recommend having a look at those, because they'll give you some other ideas about how you can position your application. couple other really quick things just in terms of maximising your chances. Just again, make it succinct and punchy and on message. Make sure you answer the questions. Look at the question. Again, we suggest to all of our clients, take out the key points there and make sure you answer them. Stress that natural fit with the grand sweet spot. Make sure you got that standout value proposition. Write it as yourself, as the CEO. Now, a lot of people, they start thinking that you need a grant writer. We tend to suggest that you actually write this yourself. Sure, get outside expertise to help you with strategy and with fine tuning. But at the end of the day, you have to implement this as well. And sometimes it really does come across when you're an assessor as to, if it's looking a little bit too smooth, but it's lost the soul, you can generally start to pick up that an outside person's written it because they really don't understand all the ins and outs. So keep in mind also the application is a standalone document. So while you can put attachments in there and things like that, just don't assume that the assessor knows everything. You have to provide them, you have to guide them with the information so that they can provide you with the best score possible. Make sure the supporting docs relate specifically to the application. Be very, very careful about cutting and pasting from other applications that you've put together because it detracts from your commitment essentially, because the assessors will look at it, they'll see that you might have an AC reference there and all of a sudden they're going, oh gosh, they just couldn't be bothered checking this. And so just keep that in mind as well.
So one of the other things I was going to say is the importance of a good pitch deck or PowerPoint slide presentation. I know from experience that the independent assessors like that type of supporting documentation around the business model, where you're at, who are the key people behind the business, succinctly high-level numbers. So please include either a PowerPoint presentation pack or, as we call it sometimes, a slide deck.
Yep. No, that's it. And look, just in terms of wrapping up, and we'll take some questions now, there are a number of other programs, both the state level, which is the top of the little snaky line there, and also federal programs as well. And so, yes, the Ignite Ideas program is a great opportunity, but also keep in mind that there's other programs out there, such as the Small Business Innovation Research Program, the Entrepreneurs Grant Program, Accelerating Small Business Grants Program, and the like. So just keep in the back of your mind that there are other opportunities out there as well. So, Ali, we've got some questions there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian and Paul. It was really great to hear your presentation. We do have a fair few questions, so we'll try our best to get through them. However, just to flag to everyone in the audience, you can actually write out your questions in the web form after the completion of the webinar, and we'll try our best to get in touch with you to answer those. But to kick off with, so firstly, we had a question from Barry. How do you expect B2C products to provide the prerequisite proof of market?
Well, with a lot of B2C products, the proof of market is really about consumers either looking at a prototype. It could be looking at, let's say you've done some sort of minimum viable product, and that doesn't have to be a physical prototype. We've seen some really interesting prototypes over the years. I'll relate a very funny one that we had. It was with some engineering students. We said about trying to sell smart fridges and to build out a smart fridge. And so we had the usual, they ran around and they were going to put sensors on a fridge and they were going to do a prototype essentially. And we had one group that said they were going to get an A4 sheet of paper, put the features on there and put it on a fridge in Harvey Norman and see how many customers stop there. Now, that's a little bit flippant. That was just a student exercise, but there's ways and means of actually getting validation around consumers wanting your particular product or service, even though you may not have it.
So one area that I would suggest is you might have conducted some sort of minimum survey to gauge their reaction as first users or early adopters, to provide something in your application about the findings from that user survey at a high level, protecting their privacy, perhaps. Or you might have early users, early adopters, consumers who are willing to provide a high quality letter of support about their experience and how it's changed their lives, their circumstances, how their situation has benefited. That's an example that I would suggest that you think about, possibly early surveying of their usage and benefits that they're getting out of it, or some good letters of support, maybe with some of their names on the bottom of those letters of support. It would have to be identified to a person or individuals. It can't just be anonymous.
But keep in the back of your mind, if you're at a technology readiness level of 5, you should have enough information there to be able to get that consumer feedback.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, second question is from Shane. How do you explain a technical product without too much jargon, but enough information so that the assessment board can understand it?
Yeah, so the best way that I've found to explain this to people is to think about it as a customer, and how you would explain it to a brand new customer. Generally, if you hit customers with too much technical detail up front, they'll get confused. Whereas if you can sort of really describe the benefit to them, and they can understand the benefit, you're actually using language that they can understand.
Yes, and I would just add my earlier comment that our independent assessors have indicated that they have a preference for particular types of industries, and in some cases, and a number of them, have a particular understanding, deep knowledge on a number of technologies, like AI or robotics or whatever, cloud-based software, whatever, remote renewable energy. So I wouldn't be too put off by being able to describe your technology in a reasonable degree of detail, because these people are well trained to be able to absorb that. Yeah. And as Brian said, they spend a bit of time also doing their own research on the internet to confirm what you've said in your application.
No, that's it. But look, just another quick point with that. Just be careful though with jargon. Even though what Paul's saying is right, that you've got assessors there that understand these sectors. Again, it's just a suggestion with putting applications. Spell out what you mean, then sure, put the acronym in brackets after it. But it's just useful to spell that out. It's about telling the story.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question is, what are your criteria for success in the stories? So what criteria is the government using to determine success or failure?
I know, do you want to do
this one? Yeah, okay. Two key words are jobs and growth in the language of government. So this particular Advanced Queensland program is very much about helping to create the jobs of today and the jobs of the future. That's a very important criteria from the Queensland Government perspective. The second thing is that we are interested, as I said, around business collaboration, or who you're also engaged with in delivering this business, this project to the marketplace. If it's all locked up in your own business and you're not collaborating with any other independent external sources, that's not necessarily a good proposal, but we do respect the confidentiality aspect, but certainly looking at how you're engaging with and collaborating with other businesses. And then I think very importantly, we're also looking at the scalability of the idea, how quickly it can scale in markets, whether that's in the Australian market or very much in the export market. We are interested in creating export revenue for Queensland from these projects. They're probably the three key government criteria. Obviously, a fourth one is that we do have a portfolio of investments in this program around Queensland. Yep. They're not all just in southeast Queensland or Brisbane.
No, that's good.
Thank you, Paul. So we've had a couple of questions around if there are any templates for the required attachments, i.e. the project plan and budget, and what is the business plan attachment requirement you're referring to if you don't require a full business plan?
No, that's true. So when you go into the application, Smarty Grants application, as you go through each of the 5 criteria, you will see where there's an attachment required, it will ask you to attach, project plan, risk management assessment, letters of support. You can either attach your own documents that you've developed, or there are some templates. There is a very basic project plan template for probably very micro businesses, I'll say. There is a very simple risk assessment template there as well. But all other documents you can attach. I'm not saying you can't attach a business plan. You certainly can attach, in strict confidence, a business plan. But recognising that the assessors will be reading and assessing fairly large numbers of applications, it is best that you cut to the chase and put documents that are quickly, easily read, evaluated, and assessed in a comparative way with others, right? And that's the key thing, in a comparative way with others. This is a competitive process.
Yeah. And the only other thing I'd add with that is going back to that point about read the question, answer the question. If the question asks for additional documents, provide them, and as Paul said, make them very succinct, because you need to make sure that the attachments actually refer back to the question. It's not a quantity versus quality sort of thing. It sort of is in a way, because if you go quantity, you're probably going to end up getting scored down. If you go in quality that adds and helps the assessor answer the question and gives them confidence, then you're going to get higher marks.
So just adding to Brian's comment, for instance, if you've had some publicity or some marketing or media exposure about your idea in a newspaper in your area or in a journal or trade press, PDF that and attach that as one of the documents so that the assessors can see that you've got some traction in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly.
On the financials, we only need accountant-prepared financial statements for the last 2 years for companies that are applying for Tier 2 funding, and they need to be the 2 most recent years. But there's nothing stopping a Tier 1 applicant from putting their most recent financial statements attached as well.
Yep.
It's not compulsory, but if you think it tells a story, if you think it helps the assessors understand your financial capacity, particularly where you're matching us, where you're matching us in those higher levels of small business, certainly attach the most recent public accountant prepared financial statements for your business. Yep.
Perfect. On that note as well, are you able to attach video evidence, for instance, to a clip to demonstrate the product in action as an attachment?
Yes, yes.
The best way there is actually just within the questions to have a URL that can be clicked on.
That's true, because I think the file size is limited to 10 megabytes per application.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's right. I agree, Brian. Just a link, a URL. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. We've also had a couple of questions around IP. So what happens if the questions are something that you consider your IP, and how is it protected during the external assessment process?
Yeah, so look, all of the assessors are bound under confidentiality. The key thing with IP is that you do need to demonstrate that you have some sort of ownership over it all. You don't have to attach provisional patents. You don't have to, there's none of that requirement in there. It's more demonstrating that the IP is valuable, and just keep in mind that, trademarks, copyright, you can talk about trade secret the only thing I'd say, if you're going to start talking about protection strategies around trade secret, is to really explain how that's going to work. Mainly because we see a lot of people say, oh yes, we're going to keep it trade secret, but then their go-to-market strategy, they have to actually be able to release some of the information anyway. And so that it just doesn't, the story doesn't hang together. So, but also talking about who your advisors are around IP and things like that, it just helps sell the story behind it.
And the other thing that I would add, that if you haven't formally secured the intellectual property rights to your idea, but it's very advanced, we will allow some costs of IP registration to formalise the IP protection to be covered in your project budget.
Yep.
There is an amount. We will only, I should have also said, on capital purchases, CapEx, we are limited to 20% of the budget.
Yeah.
We will only fund a maximum of 20% for capital expenditure type items in your budget. On the assessors have a contract with our department, a formally binding contract, which has set out rules of engagement and behaviours, including, most importantly, what Brian talked about, the conflict of interest issue. So we treat that issue very seriously within the department, and the assessors understand where we're coming from on that basis.
Okay, great. We are reaching time, so we might have perhaps time for one more question. So do assessors refer to previous applications if you're applying again? And can you also reuse previous letters of support?
You can use previous letters of support. The only thing I'll say on that is that if it's 6 months old, sometimes it's just worthwhile getting a new one done. It affects the story a little bit. In terms of previous applications, no. So keep in mind what I was talking about, that all the assessors get to see is your application. As soon as you, and any attachments that you provide, as soon as you start saying, oh look, refer to our website, or refer to, this or that, and you expect the assessor to go and find the information, 9 times out of 10 they're not going to. So you have to provide everything that you want to provide. Sure, URL links and everything like that if there's a video, but it's not a URL link to our website to please read all about this. That stuff doesn't go down really well.
So my answer to that too would be, in your application, you can say, if you wish, that you applied in round 2 or round 3. That's your call. The chances of the same assessor assessing your application in 2 rounds is very minute. So that may or may not help your case. I don't necessarily think it's a wise thing to do.
Okay, well, we might wrap it up there, but thank you very much, both Paul and Brian, for the presentation today, and I'm sure everyone took a lot out of that and can put it into action moving forward with the applications. Thank you for everyone that attended today. This recording will be available on the Innovate Queensland Grid YouTube channel, so you will be able to listen back through it and see the slides. I believe we will also be making the slides available for download after the webinar. Like I said, you can continue to ask questions afterwards, and any feedback is appreciated. So stay in touch with Innovate Queensland via the Grid Group on LinkedIn, so you can find out about the future webinars. This program is about helping you with the implementation of innovation in your business. So we'll send you a short survey and use your responses to tailor the Grid program to meet your interests and needs. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you on the Grid next time.